I'd like you to imagine your dream life. See the version of you who has what you want to have, feels how you want to feel, and is who you want to be. I'm Brittany Hoopes, your hypnotherapist and manifestation coach, and this is the show where I'll teach you to master the full power of your mind, to guide you on your journey towards destination manifestation.
Take a step back for the ones who can't do that.
This is Destination Manifestation, a podcast about using the power of your mind to manifest your dream life. We have stories, we have lessons, we have exercises, guided visualizations, and conversations designed to help you align with your goals. Hosted by me, Brittany Hoopes. Welcome back, y'all. I'm happy to be here. Happy to have you here. And if you're already subscribed to the show, thank you so much. You know how much that means to me. It means so much to me to know that you are taking your dreams and your manifestations seriously. And I am so excited to share this episode with you because if you're anything like me, this is going to blow your mind. I'll just put it simply, okay? We're going to talk all about how to overcome fear today. Okay. Now I know when I realized these tools, when I really listened to these things, and I would say not only listened, but I actually heard them. Because Lord knows we can listen to something. It can go into our ears. And do we really hear it? Do we really internalize it? Can be a whole different thing. And not only would I heard these tools and this advice, but I actually acted on it. When those things happen, that's when my whole life, especially my business, started to shift and change and catapult into something, completely brand new. I would say fear is the ultimate form of spiritual quicksand. It just keeps you stuck right where you are. But when you can get out from underneath it, then things move and they change in positive directions with such a sense of ease. You begin to wonder why you even entertain that fear to begin with. Because fear can be paralyzing. And trust me, I understand your fear might be really bad. Maybe you wake up in the middle of the night reliving the past, or you're playing out potential fears for the future. Maybe you have nightmares or flashbacks. I know I've worked with clients before that have experienced this as a result of fear. Maybe you can't even go certain places or watch certain TV shows or see certain objects or things without being reminded of this fear. Maybe your fear is even affecting your relationships with your partner or with others. Maybe those people in your life, they try to understand, but because they don't have a sense of what that fear is like in your mind and your body, they just don't get it. And, sometimes they can try to understand, but when they don't understand completely, they could say or do things that feel really insensitive to you and to what you're going through and your experience. They don't live with the monster of this fear lurking around every corner, right? You do. At least not for long. At least not after this show, you won't. But most of all, maybe you recognize that your fear is keeping your life small. I think that's the worst part of fear, is that all of a sudden then we start making decisions and living our lives in certain ways in order to sort of circumvent this fear or accommodate this fear, where all of a sudden we're living for the fear as opposed to just living the life we want to live. It could impact your decisions. You might decide not to go to certain places or attend certain events or do certain things out of fear. And all of a sudden your life gets very small. It begins to shrink. And you may even want to get over this. I'm sure if you're listening to this episode, you do, but it's probably felt like everything you've tried in the past has failed. And so I want today to be a very special day for you. Seriously, look at the date. I want today to be the day where something clicks, something changes. And I want to remind you here today that you are stronger than you think. You are stronger than you may realize. And you're stronger than your fear. Now, I'll tell you, I certainly remember there was a time when I realized that my fear was keeping my life small too. I'd say about 5 years ago. I was in my late 20s. In my personal life, things were going amazing. Things were going great. I had gotten married. I was focused on my health and my fitness again. I would say those years, kind of like right before the pandemic, were really great years. I was living in Los Angeles. I was enjoying my life. And I'd say in 2019, I was working in corporate market research. And at the time, I was working for the company Mattel, the toy company, Barbies. And if you saw the Barbie movie, I can say that it is actually a whole lot more fun to work there than that movie really paints it out to be. But I loved getting to interview kids about their favorite toys and getting to work on these fun projects. But in spite of it looking like on paper being a really cool job, which it just wasn't my passion. It just felt like something was missing. Okay. And so at that point in time, I actually got an offer to go back to the company that I'd been working at before I joined Mattel, which I would say was objectively much less fun. They kind of did research on home improvement and like interior design products. Looking back on it, it was purely because I just felt like I was aimless. Like I didn't have anything that was guiding my decisions here. I always thought that my problems and my lack of passion had something to do with the company I was at, or the coworkers I was with, or the pay, or the circumstances that I was in. It was always something out there that I thought if I could just tweak this thing here, I'll be happy. Or if I could just change this here, I'll be happy. It was anything but my own unrest and dissatisfaction. That's what I thought, at least. But really, at the end of the day, all my dissatisfaction had to do with me and my fear. My fear of taking the leap and doing what I really wanted to do, which is be an entrepreneur, run my own company, work for myself, do what I loved, be in the self-improvement space, be helping other people. And I hate to say it, but for me, during that time, I let this fear remain unchecked for several more years, and it grew into something much worse as it culminated in depression. But of course, you know that there's a happy ending to this story. I was able to shift that mindset away from the fear, release those fears, and come out on the other side of it to become the person that I am today. Someone who does run their very own successful mindset consultancy. I'm a hypnotherapist, I'm a coach, and I love to work. It is literally my favorite thing to do. My job and my work is my hobby, is my pastime. It's all one and the same. It's what I love. And the me 5 years ago, I would have never imagined that sentence, I love work, would be true for me. I would have laughed you out of the building if you would have told me that was true. Never in a million years would I have thought that, because I used to dread waking up. I used to dread working. I was watching the clock every minute of every hour, just counting down to the weekend. Can you relate? But now, I'm thinking right now, I'm even recording this episode on a Sunday night. I work most weekends, not because I need to, but because I want to. Something shifted. And that shift was, I released my fear. Actually, I would say this. I think we talk about releasing fears. I would say it wasn't so much of a release. It was more of a transmutation. Okay. And that sounds like, ooh, what do you mean by that, Brittany, right? I'm going to teach you how to do just that here today. So what do I mean by transmutation? That sounds so magical, right? As I think back of it, I think it boiled down to a couple of things, okay? And so let's take them one by one. First, I made my longtime desire and manifestation, which was to own my own company, work in self-development, be an entrepreneur. I made it feel real to me. It was no longer just oh, wouldn't that be nice? Oh, maybe someday other people can do that, but I don't have the savings. I need a stable job. I wouldn't be successful enough. I'd go broke. All these excuses, right? It used to just, whenever I'd say, what if, or wouldn't that be nice? These excuses would cloud in. And all these excuses were like concrete to me for so many years. So I didn't even try to budge them. They just were. They were so solid. I just accepted them as fact. And by accepting them as fact, I stayed stuck and miserable and mired in fear. But what was different about this time when I transmuted the fear is I started to poke at those excuses. And I realized these excuses, they actually weren't made out of concrete at all. No, it was more kind of like Play-Doh. They were malleable and their shape wasn't set in stone. I could move it. What I realized is they weren't even all that real when I took the time to look closely. I mean, tell me this. Have you taken the time to really look closely at your fear, to really look closely at those excuses? The sentences that your fear tells you, are they actually true? Because so often we're so quick to want to run away from our fear. It feels a little scary. And then we're like, I can't be in scary mode. I have to move away from this. And so we don't even take the time to look at it closely. But when you look at that fear closely, you realize it's just smoke and mirrors. Here's another thing. I didn't pretend like my excuses didn't exist. So that's not what we're trying to do. I think a lot of times we think, okay, so if we have the excuses, then let's just like la-di-da-la, like the excuses don't exist. I'm just going to live in this like la-di-da positive reality. No, I'm not even asking you to do that. And that's actually not what I did. In fact, I very much acted like the excuses existed, but I just found a way around them. One of my excuses was, I don't have enough money in savings. Well, how much would I need? How am I going to earn that money? How long is it going to take me to earn that money? Like, get a plan in place. I didn't just brush off these excuses and accept them as truth anymore. Even if they felt like truth, even if they were true, I just kept poking at them until I could find a route around them. And that's what we do in hypnotherapy and coaching sessions, right? We poke at the excuse until we can find a way through or around it. And I often find, this is just kind of like a general statement about excuses, about fear, is that if it's untrue, if the excuse is untrue, you poke it and it kind of just pops like a bubble. It can't withstand the pressure of you looking closely at it. But if that excuse is true, let's say you're not kidding yourself and there actually is an obstacle that's in your way, we poke at that and then that allows us to find a route around it. We ask, what if? And not in the kind of like dreamy, daydreaming sort of like, well, what if sort of way. We ask like, what if in a really real way? What if you made this manifestation happen? What would that look like if you took yourself seriously? Do you feel that? It has kind of a very different tone, a very different energy to it. I can even remember sitting in this exact chair, asking myself, well, what if I do this? And talking with my husband and being like, here are the numbers. Like, can I do this? And him saying like, yeah, you can. And me being like, okay, I think I'm actually going to do it. And like, I had never taken myself seriously before, which is so funny because I'd wanted it for so many years, but I never actually took myself seriously until I asked, what if? So ask yourself right now, I want this to be that moment for you too. Take your manifestation that you want and think about it and ask yourself, what if I did the thing that I need to do to actually make this happen? This is no longer a pipe dream. This is no longer a daydream. What if I took that action? What if I really went out there and did it? You stop joking around. You stop brushing it off or automatically assuming that it's untouchable. No, poke it. What if? What if? And just know, even as you ask this question, the fear is still there. It just changes shape when you do that. And I know, I'm going to sound so corny. And this old saying is so corny, but it is so true. Feel the fear and do it anyways. It's not really that the fear ever goes away. It's just that you don't let it bother you anymore or stop you. This is the act of transmutation. You take the energy of that fear and you decide to use it instead. I kind of like to think of your fear as kind of like a garden hose, okay? A garden hose, and it's on full blast. It is spraying out water. And so there's multiple things you could do. You could point that garden hose of fear at yourself, and you're probably going to get drenched. You're just going to be soaked with water, and you'll probably catch a cold, and then you won't be happy, and then you'll be standing around in soggy clothing and miserable, right? You could do that. That's something you could do with that fear. Or you could choose to point that same garden hose, pushing out that fear water. You could point it at a rose bush instead, and you can water the flowers. Same fear, just pointed in a different direction. Same fear, just used in a different way. You're not trying to turn off the hose. You can't. It's just always going to be running, at least a trickle. It's always going to be running, that fear. But one is hurtful to you and keeps you stuck in this mud puddle, and the other one is useful to you. It's like they say, fear and excitement are the same psychological feeling. Just fear is the negative version and excitement is the positive. How are you going to use it? Now, here's another way to shift and reduce fear. You just have to reach the point where enough is enough. You just have to refuse to tolerate it being any other way any longer. This doesn't apply to everything, but it applies to most things. I would say the tolerance of unwanted circumstances is not really a badge of honor. A lot of us think it is. We think, oh, if we suck it up and we become a martyr and put ourselves in these situations and live these lives that we don't want to live, that we somehow get these extra brownie points. And a lot of times we're taught that. If we just be good little boys and good little girls and stay quiet in miserable situations while the grown-ups go shop or the grown-ups go talk, we are good. That makes us good people. And so you get used to making yourself miserable. That's reinforced as a positive thing. Oftentimes we learn this at a very young age. And I'll tell you now, as an adult, I would say I personally have a very low tolerance for making myself miserable. My husband and I joke about this a lot because sometimes it gets me in trouble. Sometimes it can be hard to live in the world that way. And it's because I think I've figured out how to make my life pretty darn good. And so when it's anything other than that, I usually do something about it. I don't sit around in misery. I don't sit in a situation and complain. I just go and change it. So back when I was facing this fear about starting my business, I needed to do something about that miserable corporate job situation that I was in. When has enough become enough for you? And ask yourself, if not now, then when? And I don't mean this in the cliche sort of way, like a throwaway question that you may ask. I want you to tell me the exact date. If it is not today's date, then what date are you picking to do this? Because if you can't answer that question, it's not happening. It's not in motion. When I decided to start my own business, I asked myself that question seriously for once. If not now, then when? What would need to happen differently? And I realized when I really looked at that question that there was actually nothing concrete in my way. It was just fear. I'd been kicking that can down the road for 8 years. And for what? There was no magical time when the fear would go away. There was no magical time where everything would line up and I'd just be like, yes, zero resistance. In fact, for me, logically, factually, that time period in my life was the perfect time to start my business. At that point, I'd been working for Instagram and my contract was coming up and it was going to be easy for me to say, no, thank you. I no longer want to renew working for this company. I hadn't started my family yet, but I knew that I wanted the flexibility of running my own business before I did. So perfect timing there. So the answer for me at that time was today, was now. But if your answer isn't now, figure out when. What would need to happen? What would need to change? How will you go about creating that change? Maybe you need to save up a little bit of money as a safety net. I know I did. I'm not asking you to be reckless, but I am asking you to come up with a plan. If not now, then when? Now, I hope what I have already shared with you is enough to move the needle on this fear. My hope is that you're listening to this, you're fired up, you're ready to do some transmutation of your own fear, right? But sometimes, I hate to say this, but sometimes there is a third experience that may need to happen in order to really shift that fear once and for all. And I'm not going to kid you. I'm not going to lie to you. What I'm about to say is painful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. So please take the advice that I've already offered and save yourself the suffering of getting to this third point, okay? Did y'all ever read that, this is reminding me, did you ever read that book as a kid? And it has Grover, you know, the little blue guy from Sesame Street? And he's like, don't you dare turn the next page on this book. Don't get to the end of this book. And then you turn it and he's like, I told you not to do this. I read that book a lot as a kid and I freaking love that book, which is funny because I don't like being told what to do. And now I understand how the subconscious mind works. And so we live in a universe of attraction, not rejection. So if I tell you not to think of a white polar bear, you're probably going to think of a white polar bear, right? It's all attraction, never rejection. So I understand here now when I say, don't let yourself get to this third point that I'm about to make, that you may very well get to it, which is why I want to make sure that you're prepared if you do. And the third point is this. Another way to shift and reduce fear is by finally realizing that the other alternative is much too scary. Now, you've been running and running and running away from this fear for so long. You've been avoiding it for so long, and you run until you get to the edge of this cliff, right? And you peer over the edge of the cliff and you can see the jagged rocks below, hundreds of feet below you. And in that moment, you got fear chasing you. You're staring down this cliff. You have a choice. Finally face this fear monster that has been chasing you for so long, or jump off this metaphorical cliff. And both options are freaking scary. But one's going to scare you more than the other. And it's usually then when we decide to finally face the fear because the other alternative, jumping off that cliff, is much too scary. And I'll tell you, I've experienced this firsthand, not with cliffs, but metaphorically speaking, I've experienced this. And you know this too. If you've listened to episode 1 of this podcast, or if you've heard me tell my story, I suffered from depression. And I'm telling you, it got really bad. If you're triggered by these sort of stories, I advise you to skip ahead 30 seconds. But my mindset at the time went from contemplating taking my own life to seriously considering and starting to plan it. And so when it started to move in that direction, it felt like I was peering down that jagged cliff, and that spooked me. That scared me real bad. And so all of a sudden, for the first time ever, there was something that was much scarier than the fear that I'd been running away from. Up until that point, the fear was the scariest thing. I hit that point, all of a sudden there was something scarier than the fear. And thank God I decided to face the fear. Because that's when I realized that it was all self-imposed. And if it was self-imposed, that means I could self-change it. And I just want to tell you, please, you don't have to hit rock bottom to transmute your fear. You don't have to let it go that long. You don't have to suffer that much. You don't have to pick between scaries. I would say another way to use this principle without physically reaching rock bottom is to ask yourself this question. What will my life be like in 5, 10, even 20 years if I just continue exactly as I am? If I let this fear continue to run my life? And for most of us, contemplating 20 more years with zero change, 20 more years with zero results of our manifestation, that's a terrifying enough thought. In fact, that's often much more terrifying than just going ahead and addressing the fear. And I can tell you, actually addressing the fear head on is far less scary than it is to run away from it. The running away part is what makes it scary. Actually facing the fear itself is not nearly as scary. Because until we address it and until we confront that fear, we don't even know what we're truly dealing with. It reminds me of this story that my mentor told me. She had a client who suffered from these awful reoccurring nightmares that just terrified her. And so she came to get hypnotherapy for this. And she was filled with this constant fear to the point where she could never get a good night's sleep. And so the nightmare was always the same. There was this man in a trench coat that was chasing her through the streets. And so my mentor told her, next time you have this dream, if you can, and of course she was hypnotized to be able to do this a little bit more easily, have a lucid dream and try to stop and confront the man. See what he wants, because you know running away from him constantly is causing these nightmares. So let's confront the fear head on. And she was so nervous. I mean, this was not what she wanted to do, but she knew that she had explored the other alternative. And so she decided to do it. And so the next night that she had the dream, she realized she had been hypnotized to be able to lucid dream. She realized that she was in a dream. And so she decided to stop and confront the man. And this big, scary man in this trench coat comes up to her and says, "Ma'am, I believe you dropped your wallet. Is this yours?" And gives her a wallet. Okay? That's what she had been running away from this entire time, was actually this really nice guy just trying to give her a wallet. Needless to say, after that experience, she never had those nightmares again. Sometimes we have to confront the fear and we have to learn the truth. And the truth is not nearly as scary. And hypnotherapy is such a great tool for this. I mean, hypnosis is one of the leading tools to deal with fear. Whether that be a phobic fear, of tornadoes or spiders or heights or something else, or even just a fear of any kind, a fear of failure, a fear of success, a fear of taking action, whatever it might be, any fear. Because there is no safer place to confront fear than within the safety of your own subconscious mind, the safety of your own imagination. It's the safest form of exposure therapy because it's not real. It's not physical. It's not in our 3D reality. And yet it trains your brain so that you can better encounter real 3D circumstances when they come up. And I'll say most of the clients that I work with, once we confront the fear in a safe, distanced, very relaxed and stress-free way that we're able to do in hypnotherapy, it just becomes kind of laughable. I mean, most people have this experience, which is crazy. It's this thing that we realize, why was I running away from this? We just see it for what it truly is, not this thing that we've made it to be in our minds. We've made it to be so much bigger in our own minds. I mean, gosh, I'm even thinking I had a session with a client just yesterday where the fear we were confronting, for this client, it was a weight loss client, and she had this fear that if she gave up eating junk food, that she'd be giving up having any sort of fun. Like junk food and eating equaled fun. And so who would? If you believe that, of course you wouldn't want to give up eating bad food. You'd be giving up joy in your life. And so in our hypnotherapy session, we confronted the fear in an objective, distant sort of way. And once we confronted this fear, it was yeah, I don't even know why I'm here anymore. This is just kind of a way outdated thing from high school for you. So I'm just going to go now. Is that cool? Peace, And she was laughing with this realization. I was laughing. It was just kind of fun. It was because this fear was just yeah, I've overstayed my welcome. And it just kind of ate itself up and then it was gone. And when she came out of hypnosis, she just sort of saw things in a new light. She just sort of saw things for how they were and how kind of like utterly ridiculous that thing was. Like, she knows how to have fun without eating. Like, there's plenty of fun things to do without eating. Like, it was outdated. And even the fear itself realized when it had a chance to talk, when it had a chance to actually converse with her, when she was no longer running away from it and trying to escape from it, but they could actually have a conversation with the fear, it realized, like, why are you holding on to me? Like, I don't even need to be here anymore. And it left. And it just didn't bother her anymore. So let's please stop giving these fears so much power, right? Now, I want to touch on one other thing that could happen after you give up the fear. So I'm going to assume that you take this advice here today and you have an amazing job. And if you don't, you go and do a hypnotherapy session so that we can get to the bottom of this fear and you've released it and you've transmuted and now you're after. Okay? After you transmute the energy into something that serves you, you take action, you live differently, and lo and behold, you find yourself manifesting your desires, right? You manifest different results. You might find yourself with a new problem on your hands, which is the tendency to beat yourself up for having that fear in the first place. Once you confront the fear and realize how non-scary it is, if you're anything like me, you might be like, why did I run away from this for 8 years? Once you realize what an illusion it is, it can be easy to be like, I let this hold me back for 8 years. And it can be disappointing when you look at it that way. I mean, I know for me, for the longest time, I felt guilty that I wasted so much time being so miserable when I could have just done this sooner. But let me say this, that is a very natural response. Okay? It's okay. It makes sense that your brain is thinking this way. And even this phase of it passes. The main thing to recognize is that there is never any time ever wasted. When you have a desire in your heart and when you want your life to be a certain way, and yet the resistance of that fear is keeping that manifestation from entering your reality, that only means that your desire continues to amass more energy and more clarity for you in the meantime. Okay, so your desire, it's there. It's universally created. It just keeps getting bigger and brighter and clearer in terms of what you want. Which is part of the reason why continuing to resist that fear hurts more and more and more the longer you resist it. It's because that dream of yours is growing bigger and brighter, and it's needing your attention more and more, and it's screaming out for your attention louder and louder and louder. I mean, that's the reason why you could, in my case, I resisted that fear of starting my own business until it drove me to the ground, until I, reached the depths of depression. It needed to yell that loud to get my attention and take it seriously. And that's why I'm yelling this loud to you. Let's let it get your attention now before it gets that bad, right? And this is what it looked like for me. For example, I had ideas about like a dozen different businesses that I wanted to launch when I was working in my corporate jobs. There were so many business ideas. I wanted to be a floral designer, an earring maker, a website designer, a graphic designer, all these various versions of coach and self-development and manifestation teacher. Like, I explored it all. It was just hobby after hobby after side business after hobby after side business. And it was through this clarification process. It was through the failed attempts. It was through actually letting the fear win a few rounds that I got the clarity that I needed to actually change things and let it go. So that I manifested the thing that I actually wanted, which is doing what I'm doing here right now. Sometimes we need that exploration time. Sometimes that exploration time is baked in to the manifestation. It's what we need. So that when you do transmute that fear, you realize that it actually was never time wasted to begin with. It was honing time. It was time that you needed to hone in on exactly what you wanted and all the lessons that you needed to learn so that you could transmute that fear once and for all. So, once again, here's what we covered today and how you can transmute fear. Make it real to you. Ask yourself seriously, what if? What if I did this? Say enough is enough. Ask yourself, if not now, if not today, then when? And plan it, put it on the calendar, and come up with an action plan. Or if you don't heed my advice, which please do step 1, do step 2, but if you can't, you're going to have to reach a point where the alternative to your fear is scarier than the fear itself. And, of course, if you want help confronting and transmuting the energy of fear into the excitement that will actually help you reach your goals, well, you can address fear through hypnotherapy. I do this literally every day with my clients. I mean, every fear, I think I've seen every fear that you could possibly imagine. So seriously, go to BrittanyHoopes.com, learn more about hypnotherapy and coaching. There's a link in the show notes as well. And let's transmute this for you. Let's speed up this process so you can get living the life you want to live even sooner. All right. Well, I just want to thank you, travelers, for being here today on this journey towards destination manifestation. You are spectacular. And I just want you to win. Don't let the fear win. It's so wimpy. Fears are they're so silly. Honestly, that's what I've learned about fear the most through hypnotherapy is that they don't have very good excuses. The moment you start questioning the fears, they're just like, like they just try to be big bullies and scare you, and just don't let them win. And I want to tell you, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and if you've learned something really interesting about how you can transmute the energy of that fear and receive your manifestations, you can learn even more by subscribing to the show. Every Tuesday, there's a brand new episode that explores a new aspect of manifesting your dreams. I want you to use this as your weekly check-in with your goals, with your progress, with your desires to ensure that you're on your path towards your very own destination manifestation. And I will say there is no greater honor than getting to help guide you on this journey. So be sure to subscribe. I can tell you, your dreams will thank you. All music for this podcast is by A Cubed. And remember, come up with a plan. What would need to happen for you to overcome this fear? What would need to change for you to move forward? And how will you start to create that change right now? I'll catch you next time.